Okay, so on today's show, we have Pastor Doug Williams. And I know Pastor Doug from my friend Abigail. And let's see, so I've known Pastor Doug for about, we're in 2020, so nearly 12 years. That's a really
Mm.
good time. That's someone's lifetime, 12 years. Goodness me. Okay, so Pastor Doug, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and then tell us three interesting facts about yourself, and then we'll delve into today's topic.
Okay. No, I'm a pastor of a church in East London. It's a multicultural church in Walthamstow called Emmanuel Community Church International. I've been here since 97, I think. Um, and so it's great to have that opportunity serving in the community and working with people of all different kinds of stories. I find that so interesting and so helpful. A few things about myself, but what can I say? I was a semi-professional gospel musician, recorded. I had a single in the charts with the band. I played with a band called Paradise, and toured with well-known gospel artist Andre Crouch. I write music. I play guitar, a little bit of saxophone, a bit of keyboards. What else? I don't know what else to tell you. I love drawing. I love art. I love music. And that's what I do.
Cool. Okay. So before we delve into the questions, of course, can you give us a bit of background? What family looked like to you when you were growing up?
Well, yeah, interestingly enough, girl, my family were pretty devastated growing up. I spent most of my formative years in either foster care or institutional care in an orphanage because my parents were separated when I was very, very young. Although my mum tried to establish life for us in America, she hit a number of difficulties and health issues. One of them on the back of being attacked in a racial attack. And so she really suffered. She was in a wheelchair for 7 years. So in that interim period, of course, I'm, moving around different homes, different contexts for life. So my family life was very, very different growing up. In fact, I spent a lot of my younger years living with a white family, a lady who I was fostered with, and having to come to terms with all of that, and then eventually moving into a children's home, and then coming to London, where I joined a whole bunch of different friends, and life really took on some changes. So I'm now married with Jo, my wife from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, with 4 kids. Abigail being my eldest daughter, that's your friend. Leanne's my youngest daughter, but I have 2 other sons too. An oldest child who's a guy, Leon, and a young child called Daryl. Well, yeah, young man, he's 20 now, just finishing.
You're right.
I'm telling you, yeah,
Yeah.
2 years and he's out there. So that's that's the family life. And so it looks very different now. I mean, it's really amazing to have my own family the way it never was. But that has its challenges too, because I wasn't raised in a context like that. So I have to come to terms with what it's like to be in that kind of a family, and it's yours. It really is your family. So all of that's been a really interesting journey. It has its ups and its downs.
Mm. Good. Okay. So today we'll be speaking about mental health. I know you were hesitant to speak on it because you're like, I'm not a professional, but I think it's
But
interesting.
yeah, I mean, the whole subject is, it's very nuanced, and it
Yeah.
needs to handling with credibility and sensitivity. I just don't want to fake anything or fob things off or come
But
across in terms of superficial, in terms of how, the subject is to be handled. It's
yeah.
too delicate to mess about with.
Yeah. I think apart from having professionals speaking about it, I think it'll be nice to hear your perspective with your position in society, and of course, your background as well, your racial background and everything you've gone through. It'd be interesting to hear your take in it. So, the first question is: do you think you've suffered from any mental health issues, and how did you deal with it?
Well, the thing of when we mention the subject of mental health, the reason why it freaks people out
Mm.
is because they immediately think you're sort of imbecile, that you're completely without cognizance or coherence in terms of mental health, and you're at the very worst part of this spectrum. And I think it is a very broad spectrum and can range from people who are sectioned and hospitalized and needing treatment, just to those who are experiencing the mildest of depressions. It all affects your mental health and state of mind. I've never been at an extreme in an extreme context. Although in my work, I have to support people in an extreme context, but I personally have never had that. But I've had the issues of loneliness and depression. You can't come through the story that I've had, okay, without moments of thinking, I don't know where my mind is at. It affects my sense of identity, value, worth, perspective. Where are my parents? Where are my siblings? Why am I in this family context that clearly isn't my own, biologically, and all of those things. So I've experienced that and had to work through all of that, and had to get over the anger points in the midst of all of that. So at one point, I had a few sessions with a clinical psychologist to just manage outbursts of anger that people couldn't understand. But she nailed it, because it was the frustration of being outside of my own family and thinking, I didn't ask for this. And when people do feel that circumstances in life are imposed on them rather than invited by them, that powerlessness can lead to frustration and all kinds of angst. So that's my own story.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Before we even started with this question, the point you made about your experience, what family was like, and having to, basically start from nothing with your own family, because you didn't have an example of what family looked like. So it's very, so you do have your own experience, and you do have something to say on this topic. Okay, so next question is, do you think any of your children will be able to speak to you freely about any mental health issues they may be facing in society?
Yeah, I've tried to do that. Well, I would hope so. I mean, this is the funny thing about mental health. Sometimes people don't, but I would like to feel that my children could. We've tried to speak transparently and honestly about things. I've not hidden from them the fact that my mother experienced extreme mental health on the back of trying to put our lives together, and it didn't end well for her, because she took her own life as a result of the depression. And so I've talked through that story and shared that honestly with my kids and said, look, if we need to talk to one another, if there's a point in life where we've just gone, I don't know how to handle this, we should be able to talk. I mean, there's no judgment here. There's no sense of right or wrong. It is what it is. And people should feel free to be able to be transparent in how they express those things. So I would hope and pray that my children could.
And how do you think you've created that atmosphere? Because of course, I mean, your home life is separate to your public life, essentially. So is it a thing where you constantly have check-ins, like how you doing, how you do it, Daryl, how you guys doing, like how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just got to be a part of the life that you have. It's got to be a culture that you build that says, let's talk. I mean, the culture that currently is around for families, I think it can be destructive. Everybody lives in their own space. They have, they're high tech but low touch, if you know what I mean. There's not that relational bonding that happens. And I think we've tried to have regular family meals and holiday times where we sit and talk, have extended periods of time where you can build a culture in your family that allows for dialogue. And it doesn't have to be just a dialogue, on very fragile and difficult issues. It needs to be something that's just a part of your family life. We just talk openly. We talk freely. So I think if you're going to do that, because then, if you haven't built that, and then suddenly you've got a real heavy subject, you just don't have the relational or cultural bridge in your family to transit that subject across. It just the bridge isn't strong enough. And so I think you've got to build that in good times and not just talk in bad times.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So
make any sense?
Yeah, no, you're making sense, because I think it'll be quite foreign for a parent to random. And the thing is, I think wording as well is very key to use the right words. So there's no point in because I can imagine a Ghanaian parent who was probably brought up in Ghana going up to their child and going, oh, like at the age of like maybe 18, oh, so what do you think about suicide? Like that's what they might think is the way to ask. Do you know what I mean? Or what do you think about mental health? Are you mad? Like that's what they will say, because there's no,
I know.
There's no tree word or any, well, as far as I'm concerned anyway, in our local languages or dialects or whatever, there isn't a translation for mental health issues or depression or anxiety or all the types of mental health available.
Right.
It translates as madness. So there isn't, you're not allowed to feel any type of way, or you're not allowed to express that you're struggling.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's when people's perception of mental health issues is the extreme part of that
Mhm,
continuum,
mhm,
where people are incoherent. There's paranoia and absolute confusion,
mm,
and people go, "That's what we mean by mental health issues," which,
yeah.
of course, it's much broader than that. And yeah, so you're right. We've got to talk about these things.
Okay, so next question is, what are your, oh, let's see. Do you know where to go to if you or your child is struggling with any mental or emotional issues? Like, do you know where to turn to? I know your position is like they could come to you as well, but apart from yourself, do you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, our the medical disciplines that we're all familiar with in terms of the health services provision or any private therapy or counselling.
Mm,
Um, if you find that's going to be helpful for you, and just having a different perspective as somebody who's got an objectivity outside of your own emotional contours is really helpful. So
mm,
I think we would know. I think we would go and we'd firstly get a physical checkup and go
mm,
to see the doctor and make sure, because I don't think people understand the link between your physical well-being and your mental well-being.
mhm, mhm,
So if you're not healthy physically, it can affect all of your emotional state as well. So we'd need to go and get sort of a bit of an MOT
yeah.
medically. So I think we're all aware of where we'd go. We'd take the standard route for that.
Yeah. Okay. And so you mentioned therapy. So what are your thoughts on therapy? The idea of going to someone who is a stranger and then you just speaking to them about your struggles in life without even.
Yeah, I mean that's really quite a challenge for people to do,
Yeah.
because it looks like it's an intrusion into my privacy.
Yeah.
But then again, if you're going for therapy, then you're inviting that in, so you're still empowered. So I'm telling people, you are in control. I mean, if you walk into that office and sit with that person, you can walk out. You're not a prisoner. You're not taken hostage by the context. So you need to know, but you've got to be clear what you're going in for. We're not so much going in for the person to tell us how to live our lives. I think therapy that does that is probably unhelpful and could be quite controlling and manipulative. What we're trying to tease out is how to empower this person to, number one, recognize what's happening to them or through them,
Mm,
and then to be able to take appropriate action. What
mm,
would they decide to do? The best kind of counseling and therapy always empowers the person who's sitting in the hot seat.
okay. And I think sometimes well, for me anyway, I'm yet to try therapy. I don't think it'd be a bad idea because I think there are times where you're going through certain things and you think you can speak to one person or probably your family member or your friends and you're just scared you might be judged. And I think people are gradually getting to the stage of just listening rather than talking back and giving you their opinions. So I think therapy is, well, for me, is I don't think it's a bad idea. And of course, like you mentioned, go into the good type of therapy that works for your mental needs and your mental health
Yeah,
as well. Okay. All
yeah.
right.
I
So,
think when it comes to therapy, Q, I don't actually think there's a one size fits all.
mm,
So if you went to a therapist and it didn't work, don't write off therapy. Just
mm,
think my link with this person didn't work. Let's see if somebody else
mm,
brings a different nuance to it, which fits me and my personality better. So
mm,
yeah, don't write off the context.
mm.
Just maybe change personalities.
Yeah. And this might be a bit of a silly question, but do you reckon it's important that you have things in common with your therapist? Because so they can relate to your struggle to a certain extent. So I would assume it'll be easier for me to speak to a black woman. I would assume, only because if I said certain things, she would be like, "Oh, yeah, I get it," or "I don't get it," or they can understand and not judge me entirely. If that makes sense,
there's
is
there's value there's value in that perception. I think there is, and certainly going in to something quite fresh, I wanted to feel comfortable around somebody. So I think there's a level of comfortability if that kind of person that has been in my world, or I think would understand my world.
Mhm,
So at that point, I think there's virtue in it.
mhm,
On the other hand, sometimes the difference and the distinction between the two people is also helpful, because I want the broadest perspective and objectivity I can get on the subject. And sometimes people who are going through things and see things like me and understand things like me may not offer me the kind of scope of objectivity that my issue requires.
mhm. Okay. All right. So
You
next.
don't seem convinced.
No, I am. Do you know what it is? I am. I get it. But then it's just like, I hear what you're saying though, but I would assume that the black therapist, quote unquote, black therapist, would have substantive knowledge from across like the like they've studied, right? So surely they would have a
Yeah,
wide,
I would hope that.
the hope part. Yeah, keyword
Yeah,
is hope,
I would
right?
hope that's the case. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's possible, and you just need to go in there in an investigative way to be
Mm,
sure that that's the case. I don't think because they carry the same skin hue as me
mm.
that automatically I can assume that they would know. I don't want to assume anything.
True, true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's yeah.
If I was your therapist and you said, "Okay, look, this is the situation that I've gone through, and it's because I was raised in a black family," would I understand that?
Not necessarily. Well, oh, I see what you mean. I
You
see
see what
where
I'm
you're
saying?
going. I see where you're going. Okay, okay, you've got a point. Okay, I get it. I get it. All right. Okay. So the next question is, let's see, what do you think has been hindering us as a race to accept the concept, air quotes, concept of mental health and even acknowledging it, rather than dismissing it off as being, like we said earlier, madness or being weak or being.
Yeah, because I think in some of the contexts that people have grown up in terms of their blackness, we only deal with mental health when it's gone to an extreme part
Mm.
of the spectrum and its expression. So everybody shies away from it because you've got mental health issues when you're registered as mad,
Mm-hmm.
rather than this sort of, there's the thin edge end of that kind of spectrum where there's mild depressions, there's pressures, there's angsts, and those kind of things that need to be dealt with, and insecurities. They haven't yet become phobias or paranoia, or that level of confusion that completely dismantles the personality. So at the end of the day, I think we've had poor education in terms of what mental health really looks like, and I think it needs to be redefined in
Mm.
people's minds so that they can, make earlier interventions and feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
That's one of the difficulties, I think.
I think it's very important, the point you just made about early interventions as well, because I don't know what it is, but I think sometimes like you probably think, oh, maybe what I'm feeling is normal.
Mm.
You probably wouldn't acknowledge it because you wouldn't realize it's a thing. And then, like you said, it's never tackled with, and then at the far end, that's when it's all amplified because it's all coming out now, isn't it? And
Yeah.
um, you know, you might not get the help that you need at the time. Anyway, okay, so as a leader of a racially diverse church, I know I've been to your church before and I know what it's like, I know what it looks like as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle a member confiding in you about any mental issues or any mental struggles that they may be facing? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, firstly, in all of my, whatever the ethnicity of the person who's coming to me, or their age or gender, I assure them that the context for our discussions are confidential
Mhm.
and safe, and they're not going to be leaked to my leadership team or to anybody else. I mean, some people have tested that and gone to my wife and gone, "I'm sure um, Pastor Doug has said this to you about me, and he's probably told you that what I'm going through." And she's gone, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And so they've gone, "Oh, okay." And I guess that's a good thing, really, because they're now assured that the conversation context is not leaky.
Mm.
So that gives people a sense of assurance that they can open up. It's a safe space. But the other thing is, I assure people that I'm never going to try and counsel, help, or support them beyond my level of competence. So if I get we're dealing with an issue here that I think requires signposting to disciplines that have a greater skill capacity for dealing with it than I would, I have no problem with doing that, and I feel that I've done my best work by making a secure referral rather than trying to sort of bodge the counselling situation and
Mhm.
bumble along in my own ignorance. So that's how it's worked for me, and it doesn't matter what the ethnicity of the person is. When you get to these issues of mental health and depression, confusion, anxiety, paranoia, it affects people's heart, not just the color of their skin or their age or gender. It's about the human condition.
Mm. And I like the fact that you highlighted that if it's not in your like your level of competence, whether you are happy and willing to pass it on to someone who's obviously
Oh,
able.
that's the most responsible thing you can do with such
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
fragility.
Because I think there's
Mm.
this idea of with, I don't want to say the church because that's generalizing it, but some people will happily say God will make a way, you know, no weapon formed against we shall prosper, you know, come with a word, and I get it, I get it, but then how do you um highlight the importance of adopting modern, like, you know, modern like theory and, you know,
Well, why would people think that God is against medicine or medical interventions of every kind? I really don't get that, or why that's a conflict with miracle.
yeah.
Here's the deal. Human beings have got their learning's increased, their knowledge and ability to deal with certain things has increased, and we should give God thanks for that.
Mhm,
You know, inevitably, you know, a human enterprise or endeavor has its limitations.
mhm,
And so when we get to the limit of what human beings are able to do, God works miracles. I think of the story, one of the early stories in the gospel of Jesus being invited to a wedding
mm,
in Cana of Galilee. And the embarrassment of that story is that they ran out of wine. They weren't able to offer sufficient hospitality to their guests, which would have been a crushing point of embarrassment
Same.
for a family in that culture. It would have been incredible. And so Jesus turns this water into wine. And as I watched the story, I'm quite intrigued by it because there were huge containers for the water that people would use for ceremonially washing. But he asked those attendees there to fill the water pots with water. And then ultimately, when they're filled, he works a miracle and turns the water into wine. And in that story, we've got both Jesus and those attendants as part of the great outcome. So they do all that's humanly possible.
Mhm,
And what they can't do, he does through through miraculous invention and an above nature type of approach. And I kind of like that principle. I think that should happen right across human experience, that we
mhm,
shouldn't diminish the value of human beings doing the very best they can. But
mhm.
then having the humility to say, although I can do some things, I can't do everything.
It's true.
And I will trust God for what I can't do. And I won't ask God to do what I can do.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And I also like what you've mentioned just there as well, because I think naturally God isn't all of us, isn't he? So you can be, I say, healed, air quotes, healed through someone. So it might not be through your preacher, but him recommending you to someone else. God can work through
Absolutely.
that
The
person.
healing process could take a variety of ways in
Yeah.
which it happens. And I'd like to feel that, you know, all of those things God can use to help you.
Mm.
But I do know that miracles happen. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I just come through a 10-week battle with the coronavirus. And there was no intervention. There was no medicine. There's no vaccine, as you know, has not been found yet. But I had a day when it all changed for me, and I, you know, cleared some things out of my nose and off my chest. That I thought, oh my gosh, this thing's getting worse. I feel like the symptoms have become more dire. But actually, that was the day that marked a turnaround. And from that moment, I had no fever, no pain, no, my sense of smell and taste returned.
Mm.
Um, the chills left me, the aches and the pains went. So I do think that was a significant intervention that didn't include anything to do with humans.
Mm.
It was a good touch. Yeah. Excuse me.
Mm.
So yeah.
It's, I think, well, sidetracking with the coronavirus and everything. I think one of my biggest fears is that the loss of sense, like smelling and like, I mean, the ache.
It was horrible. That's why I knew that I was actually healed, because I sat up in bed and I went, I think I can smell bacon. My wife's cooking breakfast.
Oh,
I couldn't believe it. It was wonderful. And I just think, wow, what a testimony. So I've been telling my church, you know, God is still working miracles.
definitely. But I
That
never
to me
thought,
was miraculous.
I mean, I think losing a sense of, I don't know, I don't think I've ever thought about that as a medical thing until the coronavirus happened. Or even like in general, never thought I lose my sense of smell, probably unless my nose is cut off, but I never thought that would even be a thing. And to
Yeah.
hear people, oh, God.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank God for
But
that.
what I'm saying is that I mean, I had no problem, or my wife had no problems while I was in that condition and very worse for wear, of calling the doctor. And
Mm,
the doctor, hearing her describe the symptoms, saying, I'm sending an ambulance to your house in
mm,
15 minutes.
mm,
And so they came, they did their test, they wanted to take me into hospital. And I'm saying, yep, I could go and I'll be close enough to a ventilator should I need one. My breathing's labored. I know that I've got a chest infection on top of all of this. And I'm diabetic, so obviously there's a vulnerability here. I'm, of this particular ethnic descent and my age. So I was ticking all these boxes for
Literally,
vulnerability,
literally.
and suddenly thought, But I thought if I go in a very weak state, maybe around people who are probably worse than me, at least equal to what I'm experiencing, it's not going to help me. So
Mm,
they allowed me to stay at home.
mm,
My point in telling you the story is that my wife didn't have a problem seeing that although we were praying and saying, God, please help my husband, please help our father, that we still contacted the doctor,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. Hmm. And with
and
regard
God
to,
worked a miracle for me. I've got
he
to tell you
did,
that.
he did, he always does, and it's just like, I think we take things for granted a lot as human beings, and that's another conversation. But yeah, okay. So now, in terms of your counselling ability and what you do, how do you separate your experiences from advising people? So without you taking, like, bringing in your emotional side, because I know, like, of course, you mentioned what you've gone through in the past. How do you
Yeah,
channel that into a positive thing and reassure people that may be in a similar?
I think what you try and do is on the basis of personal reflection.
Mm,
You say, I'm not going to just try and duplicate my experience
mhm,
and kind of almost work that through vicariously through somebody else's. No, what I'm looking at is to reflect on my own experience and say, well, what are the enduring principles that this experience I've had
mm,
would lead me with?
mm,
And so you look through what you've gone through, what you've experienced, what your family have experienced, and go, these seem to be transferable principles. It's
mhm,
those principles that you use in your counseling pastorally with people. And you go, well, look, I get what you're saying. It's certainly at times to establish a sense of affinity and empathy with people, because you go, look, I fully understand what you're sharing with me because this was my experience. And then they go, oh, okay, great. They then feel a bit more comfortable. So it's giving them an assurance that you really do. They're in a place where somebody's going to understand what they're about to articulate. So that's where my personal experience is great. But I have to be very careful then that I don't presume that my experience is exactly the same as theirs. There's always a nuanced level. And so it requires humility on me to go, I may be coming across something completely new here. And that's why I'm quite happy to make referrals and get other minds and disciplines involved in order to make sure this person gets the most help that they can.
mm. Okay, so last question before we wrap up. How do you separate your life and your challenges from everyone else's? Because essentially everyone's running to you, aren't they? If they're going through whatever, they're running to you, and you've got your own stuff to deal with. I mean, you've got
Of
your
course,
own.
but if you're involved in professional counselling, most counsellors have some level of supervision for that very reason,
Mm,
because we all have vulnerabilities. Even though I am involved in counselling, supporting other people, that's not to say I don't need it for
yeah,
myself.
yeah.
So there's always a context of support, accountability that you require. Now, I'm the senior pastor of a local church, but I'm not its only leader. I have a team of leaders who work with me as staff. I have a team of leaders, some of them who are at volunteer level, function as a leadership body for our church. And they are people that I'm quite happy to hear their counsel and would welcome their oversight of my life and my interactions with other people, because I don't want to be myopic. I don't have blind spots.
Mhm,
And so I've got the help from people who I can turn to. And in
mm,
fact, there are people in my friendship circle, in my sense of context of acquaintance, that are beyond our church too, for even a broader perspective
mm,
on issues that I'm dealing with. So I just think if you're happy to be accountable, if you put yourself in a context where you've got broad perspectives and support given to you as a supporting person,
mm.
you're in a safe place.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gonna wrap up now. So what advice
Well, I
would
hope this has been helpful.
it has been. No, do you know what it is? Because I was trying to see the relationship between the God aspect and I want to say reality, but then I'm using that term loosely, the reality aspect. So actually applying it to everyday life, right?
Yeah,
And
I mean, for me, the God aspect is obviously, because I'm a person of faith, it
Yeah,
is a reality for me. I mean, I don't want to do my life without him being
separate.
factored in.
Yeah.
So that is my broad reality, you know. And sometimes I wonder how people do life without him, without that sense of faith and perspective, because we all hit these limitations. Like I said, you do all that's humanly possible, and when you've done that, sometimes you find that that's still not enough. And
Mm,
where do you go then? You know, so for me, the aspect of living that way is the best way to be human. You know, I'm a creature, and I still need to recognize the reality of my creator.
good, good. I always wondered how people lived with, what people got up to on Sundays if they were in that church. That was my break. And then, yeah, I had my break, and I was like, wow, so you guys are really enjoying it.
Lazy days with newspapers in the garden,
Yeah. I was
soaking
like,
up sun, and
wow.
trying to get ready for Monday's busyness. But
Yeah.
but for people of faith, it's a time to refocus,
Yeah.
and recalibrate life, and go at it again from a new and fresh perspective. So yeah,
Mm.
that's what we do.
Okay. So, what would you tell your peers? I call you guys the past gen. What would you tell your peers? What advice did you give them with regard to speaking about mental health, and especially with their children, their nephews, their nieces, anyone younger than them? How would you advise them to approach it if they haven't introduced it already in their family?
Yeah, the reason why some people don't feel the liberty to do it is because they lack knowledge about the subject. Nobody wants to sort of broach a subject where their understanding of it is shallow and hollow, and think I'm going to be found out. The
Mm,
moment we start talking about this, it's going to become clear that I have no clue. I've initiated a subject that I'm way out of my depth on. And so I think it's important that you read up on the subject, that if you're not knowledgeable about it, and you don't have to be like an expert, but I just think be aware of the issues, just find out what's happening, read widely, you know, take an interest in some of the media presentations on this, Google. Read some books, go to Amazon, buy some. In fact, just get genned up on the subject, and I think you'll feel a little bit more confident to talk to people who
mm,
are going through all of that. And then, secondly, be willing to have conversations with people. I mean, don't shy away from the subject,
mhm,
as if like, oh, you know, this is a taboo subject and I can't handle mad people. Just be willing to say, this is just a condition. If somebody walked into my office with a broken arm, I wouldn't have any hesitation to say, let's get to the hospital, get that in a cast. When
mhm,
they walk in with a broken mind, we tend to not know what to do. How do you put a plaster on that? And
mhm,
so that's where we feel incompetent and feel like, I don't want to get involved. I don't know what to do.
mm,
But of course, you can make referrals. You can support somebody on their way to professionals who do know what to do, and that's still helpful.
mm.
And just, I mean, and allowing, thirdly, yourself to be somebody that others can feel they can come to and talk to about the subject. So be genned up, be willing to initiate and support people, and be open for conversations.
Okay. And what would you advise to the Abigails and the queers and the late 20s and the I'd say late 30s, early 40s, the present gen, they've just started having their families, or
Yeah,
maybe even in a position to be godparents and stuff. So they're somewhat a lot more clued up. Of course, like you said, would
they
read.
are. They're a lot more clued up, and but that generation too, because of its access to knowledge and exposure to things through technology, can easily become overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, I can be going through a particular personal scenario, and it's easy. I can find a chat room, a
Mhm,
podcast, or somebody somewhere
mhm,
who's telling me stuff about it. Now I need to be sure that I'm getting the best advice. There's lots of information out there, and if I'm not careful, there's an avalanche of stuff. There's a kind of information glut that
mhm,
can pour down on me, and can damage my perspective on what I'm going through. I may not be going through things as worse as it sounds, as bad as it sounds. So I just need to be careful in exposure to these things, that I'm exposed in the wisest, most sensitive and guarded way that produces help rather than harm.
yeah. Okay. And what advice would you give to Daryl and his mates and some slightly younger? Because I think the reason why I say they've got it harder is because of the visuals online. I just feel like
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
everything else. Ooh.
Well, then you need to have, you see, that generation really enjoys peer level exchange.
Mm.
And at some point, you got to go, your peers may not be as knowledgeable as you think.
Mm-hmm.
in terms of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can get the facts from data research bases and for individuals that they can connect with online. But there's a level of experience that sometimes you need the broadest network of input to get. And so don't just try and think everything can be answered through peer level exchange. It can't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So
Is
they
that
have,
helpful?
yeah, they have to step out their comfort zone essentially.
I definitely think so, and say, let me talk to people who have got more experience in this, a little bit ahead of this, and they may not be in my age and generational link, but we're not doing. But I mean, if that's the issue, well, then you're stuck with your generation. But if you want to deal with the problem, then you're going to have to think more broadly.
That's the thing. And I think, can I just say, use this opportunity to say that we are cool in our own right? Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes I see us, like, because I've been told recently, I remember singing one song, humming one song when I was at school the other day with some of the students, and one of them was like, "Miss, you're too old. Why are you singing that song?" And I was just like, "What do you mean I'm too old? Like, I thought it's on the radio. On the radio, I'm playing, it's fine." But then I think they have this sense of, because I'm not in a school uniform and they're in the school uniform, there's this level of, oh, I can't confide in her, whatever. But we're here, we're here for you. And like you said earlier on, make yourself available in the best way possible to listen and to hear out people as well. So I like that.
Well, that's one of the problems we had. I think there were times when I was at school that some of the teachers I appreciated the most were when we went offline a little bit off the subject, and so we'd be in the classroom. We've got their professional role, my role as a student. But there would be times when I remember one guy sitting on his desk and he'd put his hand on his knee and he'd go, "Okay," he said, "Look, let's park what we're talking about here. We're in geography or history, but you've raised an important point here about life. Why would you say such a thing?" And all of a sudden, the class is having a 5-minute dialogue around, and you felt like this guy's connecting with us as people. We're not just his classwork. We're not just his work, his occupation. He's actually seeing us. And I just think, obviously my job as a teacher, is not to be someone's therapist or counselor, but for them to be able to connect with you, that human connection. Like I said, we are high touch, but or high tech but low touch. We haven't got that connection, and I just think, in a professional context, you've got to be wise just how that looks.
The thing.
You need to be, this PC and all this. But having said that, the human touch is always appreciated, and I think that's where people feel I can come to you if I need to and talk about this stuff, and you might be able to then advise and signpost as to how this goes forward. So yeah,
I like this conversation. This is good. I'm very impressed. I'm happy. Okay, so thank you. Before you go, just in case people would like to visit your church or they want to know more about your work and everything, where can they find you?
Well, we are on www.eccaog.org. That's our church number, but we're in Emmanuel Community Church International. If you're on YouTube at the moment, all the churches, because of the coronavirus, are having to have their services online. So if you went into YouTube on a Sunday morning, you'd find us. Just put in the search engine Emmanuel Community Church International or Emmanuel Community Church Walthamstow, and you'd find us. And all our details then come up on the screen, all our media platforms and contact points for us. And if you need us, well, we're here.
Yeah. Oh, I said we're here like I'm part of the team. I was like, we're here. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate this.
All right.
Yeah, we'll converse more about the other stuff we were talking about the other time.
Yeah, be good. Be good. Be glad to come back.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Okay. Stay safe. You too.
Yeah, thank you. God bless. Take care.